So I've been in this space here for over 20 years. It's hard to believe. One of the challenges in writing for Beetle Bailey is the strip has been around for so long. And there are times when it just feels like there's just nothing that we haven't done before. There's nothing new. I mean, we've mined every little grain of sand in Camp Swampy for humor. It requires a lot of concentration. You almost have to put yourself in another place. It's kind of almost like daydreaming. It's like there's a closet, a dark closet, and you're reaching in with your hand, and you're groping around to try to find something to grab onto, and you pull it out and you go, oh, there's an idea. And you go in there again, and there's another object in the dark closet, and you pull it out, and there's another idea. But there's this fear, I think a lot of cartoonists have, that maybe someday that closet's going to be empty. There's nothing in it anymore.
He's a military hero of the nation, though he doesn't always follow regulations. At the sound of Reveille.
I'm a morning person, usually 7:30 or 8. Have a cup of coffee, I read the New York Times, and then I start writing in the pad. A lot of people think a cartoonist sits down, he writes an idea in the morning, and he draws it up at night. He does one strip a day or something. I don't know too many cartoonists that do that. You kind of work in batches. I find the best thing to do is just start writing, scribbling away, and not looking for that perfect gag. Going back and looking at the characters and what they were doing, you know, in the past and other situations we put them in before, oftentimes will get me started in the right direction. So I'm looking in here and I'm seeing Sarge and Beetle playing ping pong, which is something that I don't think we've done that in quite a long time. I know my father and his assistant, Jerry Dumas, used to always play ping pong at lunch, so there used to be some great ping pong gags. Sarge is a very competitive guy, so I'm thinking about how can Beetle outwit Sarge at the ping pong table. So the two of them are at the ping pong table, and Beetle's just about to serve, and he says, "Here comes my patented sleeper shot." When you have characters like Beetle and Sarge, they've been around for so long, they have really sort of strong character traits. Of course, Beetle is famous for falling asleep, but even more so, he can put things to sleep just by touching them. He almost has superpowers. And so Beetle hits the ball over the net, and the ball doesn't bounce. It just stops and sits there. And Sarge is mad now. He says, "That's not fair." You know, the long evolution of a strip day after day allows you to do that kind of character development where your readers, if they're reading it every day, really feel like they know these people. You know, to me, growing up, I know these characters so well. I think of Beetle as my older brother. You know, he went off to join the army when I was little, and the strip in some ways is like a letter home from Beetle every day. What's going on at Camp Swampy today, Beetle? So you kind of create this world that I think after a while the readers really think is real.
Yeah, this one has some problems. This is a pure reject. I didn't get it. Boy, look at that line of minuses on this one. This got everything, every rejection. I don't think people are going to understand this.
Yeah, that was
Oh, that's a plus.
Yeah,
I thought it was a minus. You don't make good pluses.
Yeah, you got to work on your pluses, Greg.
boy.
It's a minus for your pluses. I think you need up here that you say he's already lost weight, but he's eating.
Okay.
I think the first panel, I just can't seem to lose weight. Beetle says, "Are you trying?" And he goes through all the things he's trying, and then this is why he doesn't lose weight. I like that one.
I was noticing that back in the days when you used to play ping pong every day after lunch, there were lots of really great ping pong gags, particularly Sunday pages with a lot of action. I said, we haven't done a ping pong table in a long time.
Okay, so that represents our ping pong game today.
Yeah.
They go to sleep.
Right, the game is short. It's over quickly.
I want to know where are the bologna sandwiches. You got to have bologna sandwiches if you're playing ping pong, right?
We've already eaten them.
And another good one. There's two good ones stuck together. We write over 125 gags a month, which is at least 4 times as much as we need. I'm going to sit down here and start the finished drawings. I do all the finished drawings in pencil, and then my son Greg does the ink work. And we've got quite a great system. It seems to be working. I put the lettering in first. You can be a good cartoonist and a bad writer, you'll never make it. But a good writer and a bad cartoonist often comes out on top. The good thing about cartooning is that nobody says what's good or bad. It's just a style of drawing that each one of us has. The greatest thing about my career is that I don't consider it work. It's fun. People say, well, you're 90 years old. Why don't you retire? I say, retire to what? I'm having a good time. On our lunch hour, we would always take a whole hour off, even though it only took us 15 minutes to eat a bologna sandwich, then we'd go down in the basement and play ping pong. And I'd come up afterwards, and they were so energetic, the way we played. Jerry sometimes would have to go home and take a shower afterwards. I fell in love with comic strips as a little boy, about 3 or 4 years old. My father used to read them to me. He'd say on Sunday morning, he'd say, go down and get the paper, Mort. I'll read you the comics. We'd get in bed, he'd put his arm around me, and he started reading me the comics, and his favorite was Moon Mullins. And he laughed so hard that tears would come down his cheeks. And I'd sit there looking at him and thinking, what a nice thing to do for people. And I started selling cartoons when I was about 10 years old. Dropped out of school. They couldn't get me to go back. And there it is, all ready for Greg to ink.
You all done?
I am all done.
It's all in a day's work.
I'll take the artwork, line it up. I rule lines for the lettering. And the angles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 4 is the middle. Get the lettering pen, still dipping pins in ink the old-fashioned way. This is very exciting. Maybe we'll be lucky and I'll splatter all over this and start swearing. I've got a circle template to get a perfect circle, like for a ball. Don't do that for the noses. Make sure the swoop is nice and swoopy. Growing up with Mort Walker as your father, he worked at home, had a home studio, so you're there with him a lot, and you just sort of pick that up. There's unspoken things, there's things you don't have to worry about, and we just sort of know about a lot of the things and things we want to do and where we want to take the strip. In Beetle, we've kind of established this style. One of the things that most people probably wouldn't think about are the balloons, and we like to have them nicely shaped and rounded. So, dip the pen, some ink on it. And even as I'm doing this, I'll make some changes to the lines. As you do it in the starker black and white, you start to see things a little differently. The sound of the pen against the paper makes a little bit of a scratching sound. That's a sound that I remember so much from my childhood, and it was just like, Dad's working, you know, I don't know, it was a comforting sound somehow. It's the sound of cartooning to me. Freckles. It's Beetle. People get familiar with the characters. They're easily identifiable. You know, Beetle's the lazy one. Sarge is the big tough guy. Anybody who follows the strip at all knows that. I think the familiarity is really important. I think that is one reason why it's lasted as long as it has. People come to know the characters and think of them as friends, as my father would say. Beetle is so, every line is sort of important. It's spare. Ink dries within a minute or two. Okay, a few little touches here to make sure the lines are connected. Ta-da, one finished strip.
Okay, so let's all welcome the filmmaker Dave Walker and star of the film Brian Walker.
Hey there. Thanks for having us, Jerry.
I've seen that film so many times. I still love it.
I have a lot of observations about it that I'd love to tease out with you, Dave, if you don't mind. While we, Q&A people can still submit questions to the Q&A, but I was hoping I could ask you a few things that were intriguing to me.
Sure.
So the film starts off with all of these little close-ups of all of the materials, or not materials, like the tchotchkes and toys and things, and like all of these like lunch boxes and all these artifacts of the pop culture materials that surround the comic strip and other people's cartoons, right? And I realized that like it's not until like a minute or two into the film that like you give us a full wide shot of the actual studio. You're like giving us these little teeny pieces, these little like, and I was watching, I was like, okay, it's reminding me a lot of like what other filmmakers and even cartoonists do this too. Like instead of giving you an objective 3/4 security camera down shot of a scene saying this is where everything is, this is like giving you a map of the room. Instead it's like, but here are the things you notice in the room. And so I'm wondering if that was an intentional thing where you're trying to get us, the audience, to infer like what the smell, what the feeling is, and like in pointing our attention towards the things we would probably notice were we walking into the room as we piece together the map. Was that what you were shooting for there? And I'm wondering if you could talk about like, I'm doing a lot of intellectual tumbling to get to my question. But this whole idea of like the role of inference in filmmaking, I wonder if you think about that, or if that's like something that you're just more like intuiting when you're making your movies.
I mean, I think that for sure, like giving people, I prefer to work backwards from detail to situating the viewer. I think that's, I don't know if that's something I necessarily maybe think explicitly at the outset, but I definitely am drawn to giving people the sense of something, but more viscerally, right? Like, you're often taught to do the wide shot and then go into the close-ups. But I think like in this case, the thing that attracted to me, I mean, in my dad's studio, it's still a bit like that. He has a new space now, but the first thing people notice when they walk in all throughout my childhood was, whoa, look at all these toys. But the thing about the toys is that they're relics, right? They're things that, are a mix of things that we still recognize and know and see in the newspaper, like the Charlie Brown bobblehead, and then things like, the Happy Hooligan, who's, sort of in the dustbin of history that only experts like my father, who are scholars of comics history, would recognize. And I think that's sort of the inevitable endpoint of all characters, is that they're going to end up in the dustbin heap of history. And I think that's sort of a feeling I wanted people to enter into. Like, this is just one little universe of characters among many that have existed, and this is kind of a little glimpse into one kind of world of many. And so that's sort of the idea with that opening sequence.
That's really cool. And I've purposefully structured this questioning based on what I was hoping would be your answer, and your answer led me right to it. So, okay, we started with the particular. Now let's back up to the more expansive and vague. I talk with a lot of people who make comics, and a lot of us have this moment when we were captured by it. Like a lot of cartoonists I know, like, were captured by it. Like, well, Mort even tells the story. Like, his dad is like got tears streaming down his face when he's laughing. He's like, I want to do that for people. That sounds great, and then like usually they could point out a few things, like what made comics the language for them versus something else, right? And not to elevate one or the other, but to more point out that we all have different sort of leanings. And I honestly believe that like I'm more eloquent through drawing than I am through speaking. So I'm curious if you have this moment, because you grew up in a cartooning family, right? Mm-hmm. Like, why film instead of anything else? Was there a moment where you were gripped, or is there anything about the media that like makes you say like, nah, this is where I feel like I'm at home, like expressing myself?
I wouldn't say like even to this day I necessarily see filmmaking as maybe my most natural medium. Like I I think I grew up with lots of things that were that to me. I mean, I was also played music, and my mom is a drama teacher, and so I was really lucky to have like a lot of creative outlets available to me. Obviously, like there was a time early in my childhood where I was like, I'm going to be a cartoonist, just like my dad, just like my grandfather. I'm not sure at what point, this sort of natural drift of your adolescence. And I do think that there is a relationship between comics and filmmaking, the sequencing and like understanding a gag and the timing of a gag is very related to the timing of an edit. I think that I like telling. I think I naturally like to tell stories in the medium of film, but I wouldn't say that there was an aha moment. Like I got really into film in high school, and I still make films, and I still wouldn't say I'm necessarily a documentary filmmaker, although that is like the sort of format that I'm able to create work in right now. So that's what I do. So I guess I would say there's no aha moment, but certainly like I like people and I like stories, and I think the types of stories I like to tell maybe are best told in this medium. But but as opposed to the sort of short and condensed way that you have to tell a story in comics, I prove this with my long rambling answer, I need a little more time to tell the stories that I would feel.
So what I'm hearing in there is a sense of adaptability, and like in not saying like, okay, this is the thing that I am to be known. I feel like this is a thing that's like changing a lot right now in the way we talk about art and the way we talk about vocation. Is like, well, you just get this job, you plug in for 30 years, you get your watch, and you're done. You did everything on schedule. Good job, Whereas I feel like 21st century like definition of work and of art is like much more fluid, and it doesn't have to be like
I would say like my grandfather, he knew he wanted to be a cartoonist from the time he was 14, if not younger, and he never strayed from that at all. Like talk about someone with tunnel vision, like he was completely dedicated and to an almost like where he didn't really care about much else, to be honest. Like I'm the opposite of that. I'm definitely someone who's sort of, I feel stretched between a lot of different interests. And I would say the way I've kind of tried to start thinking about work is like, I just do projects, and I don't define myself as any particular thing. It's just like, if I see like I have access to a story I want to tell, I'm going to try to tell it in the best way. I've been doing a lot of animation lately, and I find that there's a lot of pressure as an artist to like really lean into one thing. Like this is what you should do. And most talented people are like crazy focused, but I'm just not really built that way. I'm much more of a polyglot, I guess. So it's a blessing and a curse, I guess.
Well, I mean, we have somebody in the chat saying, Jenny saying it's all about storytelling, right? So like if you have to put an umbrella on it, you got to put a name on it. But yeah, you're right. This is something where we had a session early on in CXC weekend where a presenter, a financial advisor for artists, was talking about like portfolio careers, having multiple revenue streams, so you're not dependent on any one kind of gig, and having a little bit of like loose knees in the deck of the ship kind of thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's totally what I do, because I'm a teaching artist. I'm an executive director of a comics festival, and I make graphic novels. It's like, so I've got lots of different things that I can do and express myself in all those different ways. But then I get these friends who are like, oh, I guess you're not a cartoonist then, are you? Because teacher, it's like, oh, really? Like, are we going to like put everything in a box like that? So, okay, now let's throw Brian in, because I really want to hear from both of you on this. Did this sense of adaptability and fluidity, is there anything in like the environment you grew up in that you can point to say like, okay, well, that's probably, like you said, like your mother's drama, drama teacher?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like, and my dad, I would say, is different than his father in that, Mort was very, like super just railroad comics, like really nothing else. Whereas my father is a scholar, and I think, you know, like Dad, you would probably say first and foremost, like maybe you're most proud of your work as a comics historian, or at least equal to what you've worked on the strip. I mean, that's sort of your life's work. So I think being around people, parents that have a lot of different creative pursuits and being fostered in that way, like I think at times I get frustrated, or like, why can't I just freaking pick something? And but filmmaking is a good medium because you are bringing in music. Like I wrote some of the music in this film and that you heard. So like, you know, that's a nice thing to be able to work with a composer and like kind of be able to speak their language. I think that kind of like, you know, heterogeneous sort of skill set is good for filmmaking. But I would say that I was encouraged to do a lot, and they didn't really necessarily, it wasn't like I got brought to a little drawing table at age 8.
Brian didn't come in and like, your father, my father was a cartoonist. I'm working in comics. You're working in comics too. No, Dad.
Never happened. Yeah. But yeah, this is where you're going to sit for the next 80 years.
Time to strap on the old ball and chain, son.
Yeah.
Let me suck all the joy out of this for you.
Right.
You're not moving from this drawing board for the rest of your life.
I mean, would you say, Dad, that were you given that kind of guiding hand from Gramps, or probably not, right? He didn't really necessarily ask of you guys to follow in his footsteps.
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think people assume that I could draw or that I was an artist because of my father. So, you know, people ask me to do the poster for the school dance, or, you know, I drew cartoons for my high school and college newspapers. But, you know, I started working at the Museum of Cartoon Art right after college, before I got involved in the family business. And so that part of my career, which is a whole nother sort of parallel, doing, you know, curating exhibitions and writing books. And, you know, I've actually, you know, taught cartooning at the School of Visual Arts, and I was an editor of a collectibles magazine. And so similar to David, I'm just like, often say to people, I'm really not sure what I want to do when I grow up. You know?
Yeah, and you got started doing that from painting. I mean, you were a house painter, so yeah. I mean, it's like it would be so obvious you're in this family of cartoonists, like you would do, but it's sort of like you kind of sidestepped into it too. So and I think for me, like making this film, like I just finished a job. I was working freelance. I was like tutoring and doing different things, and I had some time, and I said, you know, I've always wanted to make something about this weird world that I grew up in. And I kind of just, and then I got a job, and then I kind of didn't revisit the footage for a while. Like it was too busy, and just didn't happen for like 3 or 4 years. And so, yeah, I feel like we often think we have these, you know, very few people are like Mort Walker, and that they have this sort of master plan that they start out with from the time they're 12 and carry out to the day they drop, you know, which is what happened to him. You know, he wrote gags and drew the strip until he went to the hospital the year he passed away. So, you know, I think that's sort of like the common narrative you hear about successful people, but I think there's a lot of people that ping pong around, not to be too pithy of a pun with the film.
No, I think that's an important story to tell, because I feel like we are very attracted to tidy narratives of, you know, Moana's on the beach, like, I want to go in the ocean. The ocean's like, well, come on in. She's like, I'm in the ocean now. I solved all the problems. That's great. Now everybody's in the ocean, you know. It just has like this linearity and this longing and striving, which is very romantic, but it's not necessarily like when we're in it, we're just trying not to drown. We're just thrashing around like, going like, is this the right thing? I don't know. Do you know? You know, like. And I remember when I was a kid, I look at grownups, and the story I love to tell is I saw my dad driving the car, and I saw that he was moving his hands, but I didn't see the car moving all that much. I'm like, how do you know how much to move the wheel? He's like, I don't know. I just know. That's all. And I'm like, grownups have superpowers. You know, they know what to do. They know who to vote for, you know. I never knew. So I think telling that story of being just interested in a lot of things and letting it like lead you, I think is... It's worth saying that out loud, I think, more often.
Yeah, and I think you also, like, you don't always know what what opportunities are around you until like you have to be open to a lot of forces, I think, to see stories. And like sometimes there's a story like this is just obvious right in front of me, but it didn't occur to me to tell it for a long time. And so I think that pursuing lots of things is good for every artist. And Grant Mort would say that too. Like he would go to a park and sit with a notepad and just see what would come. You know, I think being open to the world is important. There's a question here in the chat that says, the film shows what a collaborative effort the strip was. Can you talk more about that? Which I guess we should probably talk about that, because that's sort of the makeup of it, right? Like, well, I don't know what they specifically want us to, but I guess what you saw of the gag conference, and Brian can speak more to this, but like that's a form of collaboration that's highly regimented and in a military kind of way. Like it's not just like they score the gags and everything was very structured. And I think that's kind of hopefully what comes through in the film is that like this is a pretty organized process that Mort arrived at over the years. And I think that structure is really important to like how they get their work done. Brian can speak this, but like the comics is a relentless industry. Like it never stops. Every day you have to have a product. There's no excuses, right? So you have to have these sort of like safeguards, these rails to kind of keep you on track. So, and we're pretty happy to have been able to capture the gag conference because it's sort of like this mythical thing. Like, what do they do behind that closed door? Like, what's the it's just them sitting and reading each other's work and scoring it with a pencil. That's all it is. But it's something about it is like you're seeing like the primal scene.
I know when David first approached me with doing this, he said, I'd like to come and film the whole process and maybe capture, a single, idea all the way through the gag conference, penciling and inking. And I'm like, I was kind of skeptical, like it doesn't always work out that neatly, a gag that I write in my studio, bring to the gag conference. Is it going to make it past that gauntlet? Is it going to make it past Mort deciding to actually follow through and pick that one as the one he's going to do the finished pencil and then Greg inking it? And, I think I got a little bit lucky in that we were able to follow that sort of ping pong gags. That process.
Yeah, we filmed maybe you ideating on maybe 4 or 5 ideas, hoping that one of them would get through. I'm happy it was the ping pong one because it's a great one because it ties into this tradition that Jerry and Mort had as being work partners. And then also something about the back and forth, hitting an idea back and forth, it's sort of appropriate. And also is something that, to the point that you made in the film about, there's certain these like sort of tropes with Beetle Bailey, like whether it's the bouncy meatball that Cookie throws or different things that Beetle does. But the ping pong is sort of a long ongoing kind of gag vehicle, right? That's been going on for years. So I thought that was really fortunate that was the one that came through because it's pretty rich and it's pretty instructive of sort of a lot of the dynamics that make the strip work.
That's really cool too that you're pointing out that the story, like you were sort of like hunting for it. You didn't walk in with it's gonna be about you doing this strip. Okay, Dad, let's sit down. Let's figure out which strip you're gonna do. But like it was more like let's hunt for it and let the pattern sort of emerge as we start to make this thing. Oh, hey, it's ping pong. Oh, hey, that's kind of like this other part of your lives. That's really
and I think it wouldn't be authentic, right, if we forced something in that didn't come, because we need to see it through the process, right? And that was that aha moment where during the gag conference, he's like, I like this one. This is funny. This makes me think of that was unplanned, and and I think anything other than that would have been maybe like we were stuffing an idea that through the process that maybe wouldn't have come through naturally.
We didn't tell Mort and Jerry and Greg that this is what we were trying to do. It's analytic. Because that doesn't work that way. I mean, it's either the gag is good or it's not, it stands on its own.
Yeah.
And think David's spoken in before about how just sort of when you're doing a documentary, you can set things up as best as you can, but ultimately it has to kind of flow naturally, and you never really know how it's going to come out in the end. It's just tossing the fate to the wind.
Yeah. It helps when you have the access of a family member to the process. I'll say that. Doing a lot of other different kinds of projects, there's often the hardest part of my work as a documentarian is getting people to trust me, right, with their most personal things of their life. And so I didn't have to really work for that so much in this instance, but I guess there's an extra challenge when it's your family, where there's maybe other dynamics at play. But yeah, that's the exciting thing about documentary as a medium, is this sort of, life will take its turns and you don't really know what's going to happen when you start out. And while this is a pretty structured piece, as my dad said, we didn't really know exactly how it would shake out and what other topics it would touch along the way.
What I love, what I'm hearing in there, and correct me if I'm reading into this too deeply, because I have a habit of doing this, but what I'm hearing is sort of like that the key skill is attentiveness and openness, right?
Yeah.
Watching and listening and being ready to pounce on the thing that makes sense, and not trying to push it, not trying to lead anything, but just making yourself open to it. And really, like, attentiveness is like, it's a funny word. Like, we think attention means everybody's looking at you, but attention means like listening, hearing. So this is one more thing that I want to ask you, and then I'm going to go through the questions of the Q&A, is the inking scene. When Greg is inking and you close in on that sound. Now, my first published comments were all inked with a crow quill. So that when I heard that sound, it was just like, I was awash in nostalgia for like a time that, because I work mostly digital now. And so he's like, yeah, it's the sound of cartoon. I'm like, yes, it is. This is one of those things that film can do that comics can't do, is you can represent part of the experience through audio, right? Yeah. So I'm wondering, I'm just technical question, like, where did that reveal itself in terms of like, we got to mic this just right to capture that sound?
Well, I had a lav mic on Greg, and that is a good way to, he's actually leaning in as he's doing it. It's actually quite close to where the contact is being made. That was something we brought out a little bit. I worked with an audio mixer up here in Boston. He kind of accentuated that a little bit more, but it was pretty prominent. I mean, just in the room, you hear that. And people, as you say, people really do. I mean, every time I've shown this to people, everyone bristles at the sound. And some people have a positive response to it like you do, but a lot of people are like, oh God, it's like styrofoam. But the fact that he immediately comments on it, we knew that was to me, that's the pivotal moment in the film, is that idea that this tactile experience is so embedded in the family history, and is something that Greg remembers as a kid. And like, I don't have that memory because my dad didn't ink. So, but I do remember, I mean, for me, like, so much of my childhood has been captured in the strips, and like, going to his studio after school, I would ride my bike over and read Calvin and Hobbes while he was finishing up work, and kind of being around comics and stuff. That's so pivotal to my childhood, and it is to Greg's as well. And it's this sort of like this thread that connects us. So we knew that had to be in there, but once again, not planned, just something that happened, that he commented on, that I can't remember exactly, but I might have asked him, like, can that sound, what's up with that sound? I'm pretty sure that, that took a little bit of coaxing, right? But it all happens organically. It's just, once again, having the presence of mind to zero in on it.
Yeah. Presence of mind. That's a great way to frame it, right? It's not just letting things happen in a thoughtless way. It's a very thoughtful way, but it's like letting it happen. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so some of the questions that came in, Kevin's asking, were Mort Walker's penciled versions saved untouched with Greg working on a copy through overlaid paper? Or did he ink right on the pencils?
No, he inks right on the pencil in most cases. So there are virgin pencil papers, I'm sure. And there's a stack somewhere at his old studio.
I can tell one little story about that was the last week that my father penciled, which was in December 2017, I think it was. Right. It was, right before he had the fall that eventually put him in the hospital. So he penciled his last week of Beetle Bailey strips, and we have saved those.
Oh, wow.
So we have his final pencils.
And we also, he did some drawing when he was in the hospital, which is, very, I would say the sort of draftsmanship is very declined in it. You could tell he was weak. But they actually hung them in Stanford Hospital in Connecticut, in the wing where he was before he died. So we also have that. And I actually have a picture of some of that, like photograph that I took of some of that work. And literally, he just was drawing until he couldn't anymore. It was like breathing to him.
I mean, I love the close-up of Mort's hand when he's penciling, and you look at that, and other cartoonist friends of mine have said, that's the hand of Mort Walker. He was 90 years old, and it's just this gnarled claw, but he's still, it's amazing. All the lines are right. I mean, he could draw a strip like that in 15 or 20 minutes, he'd done it so many thousands of times, and it was almost.
And talking as he's doing it too, he's sort of splitting his attention, right?
Yeah. Well, that many years, you would probably achieve such a mastery that it's like most of it is intuition at this point, right?
Yeah.
So, and I also love that he's just like using disposable click pencils, like what.
Yeah, I always thought that was funny too. You expect some he's just a big pencil. I always thought that was funny.
He drew on he didn't have a fancy drawing board. Often it was just a breadboard or something like that,
That's so great. That makes me so happy. Okay, let's go to some more questions. Christopher is asking, how much time out of each collaborator's week is spent working on the strip? I mean, if it's that regimented, do you have it chunked out that way, where it's like, okay, I'm putting in this many hours this week, and then Greg puts in this many hours, and so on?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to break down, really. I mean, we each have. I mean, I write for two strips, both Beetle Bailey and High and Lois, and I estimate that I spend about 60% of my time writing gags. I mean, I write probably 100 of those a month, so we write a lot more than we use, and it might take me. I can do maybe a dozen gags in a day. So I mean, you do the math and figure out how long that takes. We filmed Greg inking that Beetle Bailey strip, and I estimate it probably took him about maybe 40 minutes. You think, Dave?
Yeah, it took Greg longer to ink than Mort to draw for sure, which isn't surprising. Yeah, I would say Mort did the pencil in about half an hour, and Greg maybe 45 minutes to an hour to do the ink, probably an hour. Yeah. There's quite a few questions here. Also, maybe we can take in one fell swoop that sort of deal with the future of the strip, and Kevin Wolf. Hagar the Horrible. So Kevin Wolf asks, are they continuing helping with the Hagar the Horrible and High and Lois? Hagar the Horrible is done by the Brown family, who are close friends of our family. And High and Lois is still going on, and Brian works as the principal writer, and Greg as well. So there is still a future to these strips for sure. They're still going, they're still running. I think, what exactly the future holds for newspaper comics in general is something that I think no one has the answer to, right? Like, as they're still a very viable business. But I think we are looking as a family at how can we extend these characters, which have proven to have great staying power, into other mediums. What are other things we can do with them? And I'm working a little bit on that stuff from a standpoint of animation and merchandise and different things. But still the bread and butter of the business, which is a daily comic strip, is still very viable and being carried out by Brian, Neil, and Greg. And they're still at it. It's still very much a thriving business.
We're coming up to close to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure that there's enough time for Ann to come back, because I know Ann wanted to talk with Brian about something. Ann Droz, too, works at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library Museum and helps put together CXC. Ann, are you there?
I am. So thanks for being with us today, Brian and David. I had the great pleasure of meeting Brian just before the pandemic. So Brian was here in Columbus because he is curating an exhibit that was supposed to be opening this past June, and we were really looking forward to it. It is the Dog Show, 2 Centuries of Canine Cartoons. And we had to postpone it, but we do have a tentative date. All of this, again, depends on what happens with the pandemic. But the Dog Show, 2 Centuries of Canine Cartoons, will be at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library Museum next summer, and we're hoping to open on June 26th. So I wanted to give a shout out to that and give Brian an opportunity to tell us a little bit about what he has planned for this exhibition.
Well, Ann and I had a really fun couple of days in early March, really. I mean, I know Jenny Robb told me, like, if you came here a day later, they probably would not have let you in the building coming from the New York City area at that time. And I barely made it back home. But we just spent, 3 or 4 days looking through cartoons, all the great characters, and Garfield and Snoopy and Snert and Hagar and Dog and High and Lois. And I mean, this was an idea actually that the people at the Billy Ireland came up with this idea and asked me if I would be interested in curating it. At first I was like, it doesn't sound like a very serious exhibit. I don't know, and the more I got into it, the more I realized that there's a lot of dogs in cartoons. Yeah. So we've got, I don't know how many, probably over 100 examples from everything from Dick Tracy, certainly Mutts, and the death of Farley, and For Better For Worse. It's going to be a great show. And
you've got 2 centuries plugged in there. So you've dug deep into editorial comics and cartoons and the comic strips, and just so many great examples. And you even were able to find some favorites from some modern graphic novels too. So there's going to be stuff for everybody. And we were looking forward to having a really fun summer with families and historians and everybody coming to hang out with us. And we had some awesome programs planned too. And so we're going to bring all of that to you next summer in 2021.
Yeah, I assume all that's safe in a drawer somewhere.
It's safe in the vault at the Billy Ireland, so climate controlled, and it will be preserved for a very long time. So it'll hold up until next summer.
Yeah. I was happy. I was worried that the whole thing might have been just called off, but we have, I don't know how all this is going to work out, but we had some great ideas for programming where people would, you might have some dog adoption activity going on. We actually, it was David's idea to have do caricatures of people's dogs, and that sounds like a fun idea.
I love that idea.
Is Patrick McDonald doing an exhibit of his painting?
So yes, we still have that planned. It's a partnership with the Urban Art Space, which is a gallery through the Ohio State University. So that is still planned for the same time. So we're going to have a big celebration, and it's scheduled to extend through CXC weekend, hopefully, if everything is going to work out. We'll see what happens with, again, we don't know day to day what's happening in the world. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that we'll all get to be together next year for this exhibition and all of these programs that we're planning.
Yeah, great.
Well, gosh, this was wonderful. Thank you both for making so much time to be with us, and we, answer all these questions. I guess if we were to close, I would say, David, is there anything that you're working on next that you want to share with us that you you can point us toward? Because there was a lot of, in the public feeds in our live streams, people were saying, this documentary is wonderful, fantastic. So if they're excited about your work, where should they go to find more of it?
So I also released another documentary this year about it just premiered at the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival. It's also a short doc, very much the same kind of length. That I will not sure what the remaining festival run for that is going to be. It's called Fill My Heart with Song, and it's about a mother. It's also really about family as well. It's about a mother and her son has, or she has Alzheimer's, as she has dementia. And he goes to her residence center and does these sing-alongs where they sing these old songs, and that spurs these biographic memories. I'm also working on a project right now. I just started shooting with a guy who is in Boston, and he's a 68-year-old guy, my dad's age, not to give out your age, Dad, but he is a avid dancer, and he goes out clubbing to nightclubs around the city to dance to house music. And it's sort of about how he's coping with the pandemic and not being able to have his community and his outlet. He has a hip re-replacement surgery on Wednesday. So we're going to be filming some of that, his surgery and his rehab. And so that'll be coming out in the next year or so, that project. So those are my two sort of pieces that are sort of in various stages of completion and release. You can always go to my website, mediaharmonics.com is my film production company. I've got some work posted there, and we'll have more info on these projects that are coming up. So stay tuned there. Mediaharmonics.com.
But you also have a Vimeo page?
Yeah, and that the Vimeo page is linked through the website. So if people want to see a little bit more of that stuff, you can check out the website.
I wanted to say one final thing about David. That came up before, and I didn't get around to it, but he's always been a storyteller. From when he was very verbal as a baby.
Yeah, that's something that's obviously in the family, right? I mean, because Mort is ultimately our cartoonist is a storyteller, right? So that's something that we all grew up doing.
Here's his mom. She will attest to that.
Yes, I'm a storyteller too.
And your medium is drama. Is that correct?
Yes, and I am writing plays.
And everything, yeah.
Very good.
He's the most talented of all of us. Let's not. There's no secret about that.
Wow. Well, goodness gracious. Just thank you so much for sharing your documentary and your family and your time with us tonight. I think everybody should give a round of applause to David Walker, Brian Walker, and Mrs. Walker. Thank you very much for being here tonight.
Yeah, it was great. And all we can ask for is for people to keep loving comics and celebrating them like you guys are doing. That's what would make my grandfather, more happy than anything else. So thank you for all the hard work you guys have done.
Thanks, everybody.